QuickStart student success story. I'm going to introduce Alfred here. He's going to give a presentation, talk about his experiences, and then he'll hand it back to me for our Q&A towards the end. Alfred, go ahead, take it away.
Hi there. Thank you. My experience here, I did the Data Science and Analytics Bootcamp. Um, and the thing that really surprised me about the bootcamp was all of the projects and the modules that we started doing in day one. It really had kind of immediate application to work. A lot of the projects that I had worked on kind of, on one hand, taught me, all the mistakes I made in previous jobs and kind of prepared me for my next job. But the big piece to all of this was the kind of the way it was structured and the theory and the methodology behind everything was really delivered in a way that was a lot easier to understand. And I was able to kind of translate that into my new job, which helped because a lot of times in data science, when you're making presentations, you need to, explain to a whole audience of people what's going on. So, a lot of the language on how to do that effectively, I got out of this boot camp. And as Nick mentioned, the other piece to all of this was, I had come from an environment where I was used to going into the office, and I've never really kind of, aside from COVID, never really done the whole remote work thing. So when I was job hunting, I was really going for either hybrid or on-site jobs. But I ended up getting a 100% remote position. And to Nick's point earlier, I think having gone through this boot camp and kind of making data science presentations, uh, you know, through Zooms and kind of learning how to interact with people and to kind of complete work that way really helped me kind of transition into this 100% remote role. And in this role, actually, I've gained a lot of kind of visibility fairly quickly, and a lot of the um, the materials that I have from the bootcamp, I'm still referencing and using for a lot of the projects that I'm driving right now. So, all good things to say about this bootcamp. I was very glad that I discovered this and very happy that I got to go through it.
And you were, this is Gwen Gayhart, Director of Career Services, and I've just a couple of questions for you, Alfred, if you don't mind. Thanks so much for sharing your experience. You were, were you able to tap into some alternative financing? Correct? That that maybe
Yes.
tell your story a little bit about that. Kind of where you came from, not necessarily specifics, but kind of where you came from. What prompted you to choose to go through the bootcamp?
Yeah, so I secured my funding through the federal WIOA program. And that was because I was, part of that wave of tech layoffs that happened, that started happening at the end of last year. So when I found myself without a job, I learned about WIOA funding. And, it was through that WIOA application process and working with the kind of the office that managed that funding. That's how I discovered this bootcamp. And a big piece of this was to really help me kind of one upskill in kind of data in areas of data science that I felt like I was lacking, so I could, find that next job, but also kind of pivot a little bit into a different area of what I've been working in. And this boot camp was appealing to me because it was, a really nice mix of kind kind of data science from a business and presentation perspective, as well as more of the technical side of data science, especially with Python programming and all of the fundamental math that goes behind a lot of the more technical pieces of this field. So it was kind of like that perfect combination of what I was looking for.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Because I was going to say, perhaps you can, kind of fill in the group a little bit about what finance data governance means, because, as you mentioned, it's sort of a combination of things. It's not just number crunching.
Right. So finance data, in my role at Shake Shack with finance data governance, so I oversee, I work with our accounting and our finance teams. As a publicly traded company, we have very strict controls around our financial data. And so the data itself, the systems that maintain it, the processes that are in place for accountants to use it for reporting, all of that has to be kind of really thought out, and really kind of the process needs to be designed out and kind of meet certain compliance requirements. So my role is, kind of overseeing all of that, the governance of our data, how it's being used, how it's being managed, how it's being kind of handled, received. It is slightly different from actual data science work, which is, the presentation of, doing your research and kind of parsing through that information to extract insights. Where the overlap, I think, with this bootcamp and this job, what really helped me in the interviews was kind of being able to speak to a lot of the fundamentals of data. So the things that are covered in the bootcamp. So SQL, for instance, was a big piece and an interview question. And just really understanding data structures, data types, and really how to access and manipulate data. I guess the soft skills that came out of this bootcamp that really has a direct impact on this job is something that a lot of people don't really talk about, but it's the presentation work, right? So it's like the bootcamp, with each capstone and with each project, you're building out a project plan, you're following that project plan, you're making your presentation. All of that is process documentation and planning and project management. And those are the soft skills that, any position at any company is looking for. And, that is core to my job in data governance is doing all of that documentation, making sure everything's documented, having a plan in place, following that plan, and being able to kind of have that for historical reference.
That's great to hear, actually. We certainly love to hear the that you were able to obtain and acquire basically some additional soft skills as well. You've got background obviously in the tech industry. In fact, as Nick was describing sort of the prerequisites, so to speak, or sort of the ideal, kind of background for someone going into the data science and analytics program, your story actually immediately came to mind, because you mentioned that you did work technically in finance prior to your more recent position where you were laid off. So you've kind of worked in different environments, and from a more, like you said, kind of more of an old school kind of an environment in your initial position in IT, and then in more of a startup type of an environment. And do you feel like what you learned and what you obtained and were able to gain from the bootcamp, do you feel like that applied in both of those kinds of environments?
Oh, absolutely. So just some context. My career over the last 10 years, has spanned kind of public sector companies as well as private sector. The tech company that we're talking that we worked at is so I worked at Twitter before, and now I'm at Shake Shack. And so, we're talking about like public sector, social media, and now hospitality. And what's unique about Shake Shack is it's kind of like it's a hospitality company and a tech company combined. But what all of these companies have in common, and what they were really looking for in kind of, if we're talking about the skills that came out of this boot camp, one, it's that analytical skills and the kind of the understanding of the fundamentals of data, right? The methodologies,
Sure.
the structures, the infrastructure of systems, and then the soft side is the presentation and the organization piece. All of those are covered here, and I think these skills are really just so transferable across any industry, any sector, any role. Like, it's not just in a tech specific position. When I was job hunting, data governance was not in my kind of purview at all. It was Shake Shack's recruiter that found me through LinkedIn. And, we started chatting about the role, and it was interesting. And that's, here I am. So I think, all these skills are transferable, and especially with the way technology is developing and with the growth of data analytics, like these opportunities are growing, right? So I would suggest broaden horizons, just,
Sure.
capitalize on keyword searches on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. Well, for example, I often will coach our cybersecurity students to look beyond just cybersecurity analysts and consider things like identity access management and that type of thing. It's typically keywords or job titles that that aren't necessarily the first thing that come to mind, but encompass a lot of the same ground. Kind of cover a lot of the same ground for sure. Well, and I don't know if anyone has any specific questions for Alfred. We can certainly open up the floor for that if we like. But I like that you mentioned LinkedIn, because it is something that in career services that we do emphasize a lot. And we were talking just before this, I know, Alfred, with the team, that 95% of recruiters go to LinkedIn for their talent. And so it's absolutely critical to exist there, to be there, and to build a brand there, kind of a personal presence or a professional presence there. And that's one of the things that we work with students to help them optimize their LinkedIn profiles. Even if you've never had a LinkedIn profile before in your life, we have a guide that starts at square one. So, it's an important piece of that professional aspect. So I appreciate that you mentioned that.
I used to be very hesitant about being active on LinkedIn. I wasn't really sure how useful it was, because I really just thought of it as a corporate Facebook. But once you kind of, there's a certain point where I think you start seeing the benefits of LinkedIn. I mean, this job and my job at Twitter, it was all because a recruiter found me on LinkedIn. And so it really is a great way to just maintain and manage a professional network, but also just keep a pulse on what's actually happening in the labor market, because it is all concentrated on this one platform.
Absolutely. And I think you made another good point previously, that you mentioned essentially that, even though you're currently working at what would be considered a hospitality company for all intents and purposes, its primary function, the truth of the matter is that every company has a technology need, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're looking for software engineers. We're looking for infrastructure architects. I mean, pretty much every company is becoming a tech company. They kind of have to.
Right, exactly. There's just that much need for it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember who was it that mentioned it. It might have been one of our cybersecurity students who's worked for DoD, for Department of Defense, that they've now come out with the requirements that basically any company that does business with the federal government has requirements that they have to meet, standards. If you're a hot dog vendor, you need to have cybersecurity as part of your business.
Hmm.
And make sure those kind of firewalls are truly protecting everything. So it's expanding all the time for sure. So I really really appreciate you sharing your experience. I mean, I think it's a very inspiring story. And hopefully the attendees today, you guys are able to get something out of that kind of the opportunities and possibilities there. I don't know, like I say, Nick, if there are any questions specifically for Alfred, or
I haven't seen any come into the chat.
Okay.
But
Okay.
definitely I think that the major takeaway for everyone who's here with the webinar and who's listening to Alfred's experiences and some of the experiences that Gwen has shared is that our students come from all walks of life. And whether you are coming into our programs with experience, or you're coming in, and you were a truck driver prior to coming into the IT sphere, we can find a program for you and we can support your learning. And then Gwen's team can step in to teach you how to approach those technical interviews if you've never been to one like Alfred has, to teach you how to build your resume or your LinkedIn profile. And the main takeaway here is that Alfred's still in our program and he's been able to be successful. So our students can come from absolutely any background, and we can help you bridge that gap between where you are and where you are now. And for everyone who's attending here, I definitely want you to be able to take that away from his experience.